Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordan and welcome to today's video, which is my March wrap up. This is going to be a pretty quick and easy video because I only finished 8 books in March. It's my slowest reading month so far this year. I am still happy with 8 books though and excited to talk about them. In addition to the 8 books that I finished, I did also DNF 2 books, which I won't include in my stats that I talk about here at the beginning, but I will talk about in the book specific portion and talk a little bit about why I DNF'd those books. To get right into the stats, 5 of the 8 books that I completed were for videos. The other 3 were quote unquote for fun. 2 of them were for some in-person book clubs. 1 of them was truly just for fun. As far as a genre breakdown goes for the books, 3 of the books were mystery thrillers. 3 of them were contemporary romances. 1 was a historical fiction and 1 was, I guess I would say, fantasy. You could also convince me that it's more sci-fi. As far as my star ratings of the 8 books I finished, I gave 0 1 stars, I gave 1 2 stars, 2 3 stars, 4 4 stars, and 5 5 stars, which makes for an average rating of 3.625, which I feel like is higher than some of my more recent months, so I'm happy about that. For the formats of how I read these books, 4 of the 8 or 50% were ebooks, which is so new for me. Ebooks are completely taking over my reading this year, and I am really enjoying it. 2 of the books I own physical copies of, but read primarily via audio. 1 book I don't own physically, but read via audio. And 1 book I own physically and read primarily physically. As far as author demographics, 7 of the 8 books I read had female identifying authors. Only 1 was a male author. 5 of the books were written by white authors and 3 were by BIPOC authors, which is 37.5% non-white authors. This is a stat that I have a goal around this year. I would like to get that up to 40% for the entire year. So I'm close but not quite there for this month. And then as far as diverse representation inside of the books, 4 of the 8 books, or 50%, contain some sort of diverse representation. This is also something I have a goal around. I would like to hit 50% for the whole year. So right on track for this month. And within this month, 3 of the books contained BIPOC main characters, and 1 book contained representation for a chronic illness, specifically a congenital heart disease. And then last but not least, for the publisher breakdown, all 8 books that I read were published by one of the big 5 publishers, which means 0 books were independently published. This is not something I specifically have a goal around. It's just something I'm tracking for my own personal knowledge. It's very interesting to me to see which publishers are publishing the books that I'm naturally picking up. And with that, we can get right on into the actual books themselves. So the first set of books to talk about are books that I read for my March ARCs vlog. I will link that video down below in case you missed it and you want to see more of my in-depth thoughts about these books I'm going to talk about. Because that video exists, I won't go too in-depth with these books' synopses and my thoughts on them because I don't want it to get too repetitive for the people who did watch that video. This is not all of the books that I read in that vlog. A few of them I read at the very end of February, so I included them in the February wrap up. But the ones that I read in March are, first of all, This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. One of my most anticipated books for this entire year, and I'm so happy that it lived up to the hype for me personally. This is an adult contemporary romance. It's technically the second in a series. I loved it just as much as the first book in the series. I can't wait for the 3rd one to come out. The cover is one of my all-time favorite book covers. I just loved everything about it. So 5 stars, my only 5-star read of the month. Not surprised that it is so, but very happy about it. And it is the 1 book from this video that I did go ahead and get myself a physical copy of. The next book that I read for that video is called The School Run by Allie Lowe. This is a mystery thriller about mothers of these preteen sons who are all competing to get a spot at this really prestigious school in their area. It's set in Australia. I hadn't ever heard of this book or this author before. I had no expectations going into it, and I'm happy to say I was very pleasantly surprised by it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. Then I read Expiration Dates by Rebecca Searle. I would say this is a contemporary romance book, but there is a little bit of a speculative element to it. It's about a woman who, every time she enters into a romantic relationship, she receives a note that tells her exactly how long that relationship is going to last. And this book kicks off when she is going on a first date. She receives a note that has the guy's name on it, but it doesn't have any date or length of time on it. So it's all about what's happening to this relationship that no longer has an expiration date. I did enjoy the first half of this book, but right around the halfway-ish mark, it takes a really serious turn in its tone and what the book is about. I do talk about this more in detail in that vlog if you're curious to hear more about what that element is. I don't want to talk about it in the wrap-up because I do think it's spoilery, but I also do think it could potentially be triggering if it makes its way to the wrong reader. So if you have concerns about that, go check out that vlog. Check out the mild spoiler section and I'll tell you what that trigger warning is. But I ended up giving that book 3 stars. And then the last book that I completed for this video is Where Sleeping Girls Lie by Farida Abike-Iyamide. This is a young adult mystery book about this girl who is going to this boarding school for the first time. She's got a lot of family history and baggage and things that she's recently gone through. And when she gets to the boarding school, it seems like her luck might be turning around a little bit. She starts getting along really well with her roommate. And then all of a sudden, just a day or two after she meets her roommate and she gets into this routine, her roommate goes missing. So it is all about her trying to figure out what happened to her missing roommate and solving some bigger mysteries about what's all happening at this boarding school. I really enjoyed this one, not only the mystery itself, but also the social commentary, which I have come to love this author for, and I gave this book 4 stars. Then the last book that I attempted to read for this video, I did DNF. It's The Mystery Writer by Sulari Gentile. This is an adult mystery thriller that I already don't remember all of the details of the plot of it. I do give a summary in that reading vlog, and again, I talk more in depth about why I DNF'd it. But long story short, I really didn't care about the protagonist of this book. I wasn't invested in her story, and I wasn't invested in her involvement in the mystery that surrounds her. Also, there's like a conspiracy theory element of this book. Every few chapters it's interspersed that I didn't quite get to how it relates to the main storyline, but again, I just wasn't invested enough to find out. So I put the book down, which is a bummer because I have enjoyed this author in the past, but hopefully it finds its readers that do enjoy that conspiracy theory element to it and resonate more with the character and mystery itself. Then the only other book that I read for a video in March is a video that has only been started and hasn't been finished or posted yet. It's my latest Aardvark reading vlog, and the first book that I read for it is a very chunky one. It's The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. This is a historical fiction book about a 12-year-old black boy who is found guilty of a crime, and he gets sentenced to 6 months at this reformatory, which is supposed to be a school for boys, but is a lot darker and more sinister than that. So it's not only about his experience at this reformatory, but also about his sister, who is trying to get him freed from this reformatory, and eventually it takes it into her own hands to get him out of there. I will save my super in-depth thoughts for that video because there is a lot to say about this book. A lot happens, but overall I really enjoyed it. Though I will caveat that enjoyed is probably not quite the right word. This book is really sad and disturbing. There's a lot of abuse happening to the boys at this school. There are scenes of whipping and flogging. So please tread carefully when it comes to the actual subject matter of this book. But underneath that, the love that these siblings have for each other and the care that I came to have for these boys, these characters at this school, is really deep. This is the first book of this type that I've read that follows boys who go to a reformatory or an institution like this. All of the books that I've personally read that have similar premises follow women, which I also think is an important set of stories to tell. Of course, I love women's stories, but there is something particularly sad about the systemic issue that is young boys' incarceration, of course, especially focusing on the racial element of that. And so I thought this story was really necessary because it doesn't typically get highlighted and needs to if change is ever going to be made. As far as I understand, this school, this reformatory, is an actual place that actually existed, that was eventually shut down. And so for all of those reasons, again, I think it's a really important read. It's emotional and impactful. I think it's worth the long length that it is, though it does feel long. So I did give it only 4 stars instead of 5 because I think we could have gotten to the point maybe a little bit faster. But what a hard-hitting emotional read. Highly recommend it if the topic sounds interesting to you. Then getting into the books that I have not talked about in videos already. The first one I read is a reread. It's a book I read a few years ago. It's The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This is a book that I read a few years ago, closer to its release. It's a fantasy / sci-fi book about a woman who is planning to take her own life. And when she does that, she ends up in this like in between purgatory type place called the Midnight Library, where she gets the opportunity to open books that represent alternate versions of her life and go into them and experience what her life would be like had she made different decisions. When I first read this book, I gave it 4 stars. When I read it again this time, I gave it 4 stars. I did read it because an in-person book club that I help host was reading this and discussing it in the month of March, so I wanted it to be fresh in my mind. And I just feel like the overall message of this book is really resonant. Though it might not hit every person in the exact same way, I feel like it's very evocative of the idea of what would you do, what would your life be like if you made different decisions? And is there an alternate reality where you're truly happy if you got to correct some of the regrets or mistakes that you made in this life? Would you really be that much better off had you made different decisions? This book explores that idea through this character. And though it maybe can't answer that question for every person who reads it, I do like the conclusion we make for this character, and I like the conclusion it helps me draw for my own life. So again, 4 stars. I definitely think it's worth a read if you somehow have not read this book yet and have always wanted to. Very thought-provoking and fun to read and talk about. Then for another in-person book club, I read Bunny by Mona Awad. Now this is a book with a reputation that precedes it. This is, I guess I would say, a horror book about this woman who is in college. She's in a graduate writing program, and she's been going to school with this group of girls who call themselves the Bunnies. They call each other Bunny instead of their names. And one day our main character gets invited to go to an event with the Bunnies, and weird things happen from there. I will preface my review of this book by saying I, as a general statement, don't enjoy weird books. I never have. I know that about myself. That's really the reason I haven't picked this book up already, is because I knew I probably wasn't going to like it, and I didn't. I spent most of my time reading this book being, one, confused, but also really being on edge about what this book was about. People who talk about this book talk about how it's not really what it says it is. What's happening in the book isn't really what's happening. So I was just trying to figure out like what is happening. And for me personally, the payoff and the ending and the reveals of this book were not worth the confusion and honestly the boredom of reading most of the book. Now, what I do enjoy having read this book is being able to go now and look on message boards to watch spoilery videos about this book and hear other people talk about it because it is so infamous and so many people have things to say about it. I like being in the know about popular things and being able to hear different people's theories about this book. I do also respect what I think Mona Awad is trying to do in this book. I just don't think it resonates for me. It does have a lot to do with like creativity and creating art, and in this case the main character is in a writing program, so I think it has to do a lot with the art of writing and being an author, and that's not something I relate to or again resonates with me deeply. And so while I respect that commentary and again what this book is trying to convey within that topic, I just didn't enjoy the act of reading it. But I am happy to talk about it with anyone else who has read this book and who wants to talk more in depth and more spoilery about what did or didn't happen in this book. Feel free to message me and we can totally talk about it. I'm glad this book has an audience of people who love it. It's just not me, and I gave it 2 stars. All right, the final book that I finished in March was a complete impulse read. I didn't really have plans to read this book. I didn't have a video or a reason to read this book, but one day while I was traveling, I needed an audiobook. So I picked one that has been sitting on my shelf for a while and I had available to listen to. It's The Boyfriend Candidate by Ashley Winstead. Ashley Winstead is an author who I believe with this book, I have read all of her books. She has, I think, 5 of them. 2 have been contemporary romance, which is what this one is. And her contemporary romances have a political undertone to them. So the first one in this series is called Fool Me Once. It follows one sister. This follows the other sister. So it's not a true sequel, but kind of a companion series. And this book specifically is about our main character who is a librarian who has a one-night stand or an attempted one-night stand with this guy who is a politician. And then because of things that happen, they end up having to fake date because it gets out that they were together. He doesn't want it out there that he was doing a one-night stand. So they act like they've been in a committed relationship for a while. This I thought was completely fine. It did the job of being entertaining enough for me to listen to while traveling, but wasn't anything overly special in my opinion. These characters are not going to stick in my mind long term. There was nothing really, you know, emotional or special about the book or the romance, which is usually the thing that kind of sets me over into really loving a romance book. But at the same time, I did like the political elements in the book. I enjoy books that have political things to say. I know some people don't, so if that's you, definitely steer clear because this is all about the politics that these characters are involved in. That is something I liked but didn't love, so I gave it 3 stars. And then last but not least, a book that I tried to read this month but ended up DNFing is one that I'm sad about because it's one of my favorite covers, but it's Cleat Cute by Meryl Wilsner. I tried to read this book as part of the Bows and Books readathon, which I was a co-host for this last month. It fit one of the prompts of a bow on the cover because their shoelaces are tied into bows. This is an adult contemporary queer romance about 2 women who are on the national soccer team together. There's a bit of an age gap because one of the women has been on the team forever. She's very experienced. And then the other woman is brand new to the team. She's much younger. Normally, I love a queer romance, especially one that has a sports focus, but there were a number of things that just didn't work for me in this one. First of all, how this couple initially interacts, and something that happens at their first practice is that they end up betting a kiss on who can do like their warm-up the fastest. And like, these are professional athletes. They're literally at work together. It made me feel really weird that that was their first interaction, and it felt unrealistic. Like, that's not what 2 teammates would do in their first practice together. It just felt like a really convenient yet weird way to give them some sexual tension. And then very early on in the book, they get into their sexual relationship, which I know some people enjoy, but for me personally, that's not the reason I read romance. And I was feeling no actual connection or emotional impact or evolution from the characters or anything. We were just getting the smut. So I figured this book is probably not for me if pretty early on I was feeling all of those feelings. None of them really were good. So I did DNF it. I am sad about it. If the premise of that sounds good to you and like what you do seek out in romance books, then by all means, please pick it up. I don't want to steer anyone away from it. I just want to say that it was not what I was looking for. This book is now listed in my Pango bookshop if anyone wants to purchase my copy. But yeah, again, sad about it because it is so beautiful. So with that, those are all the books that I read in March. Please let me know if you have also read any of the books that I talked about, what your thoughts were on them, if we agree or we disagree. I would love to hear your thoughts either way. Also, let me know how your March reading month went. Hopefully your April is off to a good start already. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.